Okay, so I was going to record a different video, and then I sort of flip-flopped and decided I was going to record this video first because I think it's maybe useful to understand the gods, understand what they do, um, to just get a basic understanding of the game before we start talking a little bit more about damage and how to do good damage, right? What are the meta ways to do good damage? Um, and so I'm going to describe all the gods. I'm going to give their strengths and their weaknesses. I'm going to do, give use cases for them. And then I'm going to stick them into a tier list, not because that's a particularly good way to transfer that, to like, give that information, but mostly because I'm a YouTuber now, question mark, in theory, if not in practice. And so YouTubers stick things into tier lists. I don't know. It's the law of the land, and I want to try it one time. Okay. So what was that long introduction for? Basically to say I'm I'm going to make a tier list. If you care about that, then that's fine. But realistically, what you should do is you should think about what I'm saying as opposed to caring about necessarily where do I put gods in the tier list. Now we're going to start with Zeus. Zeus has a lot of use cases. In fact, I would say Zeus is pretty much universally useful. Now this might be a little bit of surprising to you if you're maybe a little bit of a newer player because Zeus doesn't have a great first impression. At least it didn't have a great first impression on me. And there are a couple reasons for that. The first is that Zeus's curse is Blitz, and Blitz isn't suited for being your main damage source because it has a cooldown on it, so it doesn't apply as often as you think, and so you don't really want to put it on your your main attack because you don't want to just be spamming it all the time, right? Instead, right, like you should put it on whatever your not main attack is. So, for example, if you're using your attacks, then you should put it on your special. If you're using primarily specials, you should put it on your attack, and it works really good as a support effect, right? But a lot of Mel's weapons, a lot of the first aspects that you get, right, or Mel's aspects, they don't incentivize you to combine both your attacks and your specials a lot. So Zeus can fall a little bit by the wayside. Now, the other thing is that Zeus benefits a lot from global damage boosts, and the strongest global damage boosts are available in the Arcana. So, while your Arcana page is maybe not filled out when it's not upgraded to its maximum, Zeus doesn't feel as strong as he ends up feeling once you do have those upgrades. In particular, here, if I'm talking about the origination and the Furies, which give a 50% global damage boost and a 30% global damage boost, respectively. So, what else can Zeus do? Well, one thing he can do is he really helps with rapid attacking weapons. The reason is that he has Chain Lightning, which is an effect that applies every time you hit an enemy. So, of course, the more often you hit enemies, the better it is. And in particular, uh, it's kind of similar to Poseidon's Waves or Hestia's Scorch, right? But the thing is that it's not a core boon, right? So Poseidon's Waves are a core boon, right? They are a boon specifically for your attack. Once you get them, you can no longer get attack boons from other gods, right? The same thing with Hestia, right? You once you get her attack, you can no longer get attack boons from other gods, and so you can't like stack Poseidon's attack with Hestia's attack to get both of those effects at the same time. You could stack Poseidon's attack with Zeus's attack to get both of those effects at the same time. You could stack Hestia's attack with Zeus's attack to get both of those effects at the same time. And so Chain Lightning is a really good way to add on extra damage for rapid attacking weapons. It's very strong. And even if it's like the amount of damage it does doesn't look that good, it's not that much worse than Poseidon's Waves. And also because it bounces between enemies, it's more effective than it looks. Lastly, Zeus's Infusion boon. Air quality is really strong for rapid attacking weapons, right? Because the way it works is that it looks at how much damage you do, right? So let's say, for example, you have Poseidon waves, right? They could do 20 damage. Maybe you have some global damage bonuses, so they do closer to 35, 36 damage. And then it says, okay, well, this is less than 50, so I'm going to automatically bump it up to 50, right? And it works on Poseidon waves, it works on his Chain Lightning, it even works on Hestia's Scorch in a kind of a weird interaction, but it does, in fact, increase Hestia's Scorch damage. Um, it's just very, very strong, right? Another way you can use it is that you can combine it with Demeter, right? Demeter has, first of all, her cast deals damage. Every once in a while, it deals like 10 damage, so you can bump that up to 50. She has these Cyclone or Gale effects from her sprint or from her tier 2 cast support boon that usually you use for defensive purposes, but in this case, because they do like 8 damage every quarter second, you can boost that to 50 damage every quarter second. And that's just a ton of damage, right? That's a huge increase to your DPS. And so what I would say is Zeus is really good on essentially every weapon. And not only is he really good on essentially every weapon, he's so good that when you see him, at least when I see him, I often snap pick him, right? Unless I'm like specifically thinking, okay, I want to combine these two gods for their duo boon, and I happen to see the second god. If I see Zeus, I'm just taking him. And for that reason, he goes into S tier, and I don't really think that there is a strong argument against that. Now, Poseidon, Zeus's big brother. Poseidon's different from Zeus largely because I think his support capabilities are pretty minimal, but he's pretty okay as a main damage god, right? So the way you use Poseidon usually is that you take his attack or special depending on the weapon. Usually this is a rapid attacking weapon because you want to apply his attack and special repeatedly so that you can get that on hit damage, right? And then Poseidon's cast or his secondary boon Slippery Slope gives you Fraught, which deals damage, uh, gives you a chance to deal extra damage every time you hit an opponent. So that's even more reasons to put him on a rapid attacking weapon. And then you just scale all of that up with global damage bonuses, or you pair him with Zeus for Zeus's Blitz and Chain Lightning and Air Quality as just spoken about, and he generally does pretty well, right? Now, he does have some support capabilities, but they're relatively minimal. The one that I'm specifically going to kind of highlight is Geyser Spout, right? Geyser Spout gives you a lot of extra power in your Mega Cast. Most weapons don't want to use their Mega Cast. Most of the time, you don't want to use your Mega Cast. That's because it's slow, right? But there are some weapons which do want to spam their Mega Cast. Specifically here, I'm thinking about Charon's Aspect of the Axe. Charon's Aspect wants to spam its Mega Cast, and getting a bunch of extra power on that Mega Cast, that extra power increases the cast's base damage, which means that it then gets multiplied by any global damage bonuses you do. So we just talked about how, between Furies and Origination, you get 80% global damage bonus. When you get that boon, you aren't just getting that extra bonus power every time you proc your attack, you're getting an 80% of that as an additional bonus on top of that, and that's really strong. So Poseidon, he's good on rapid attacking weapons. He's good specifically for this Omega Cast as a support god for these Omega Cast builds. The problem with him largely is that him and Hestia often step on each other's toes to a certain extent because they both want to be on rapid attacking weapons. They both want to be the main god on rapid attacking weapons, and they therefore they don't mix that well. It's not completely like a lost cause. Like you can still take Hestia's Scorch effects and Poseidon's cast to apply his Fraught, so that you can still get that bonus damage every, you know, you can get a percentage chance to get that bonus damage whenever you're hitting an enemy. So it's not completely a lost cause, and their duo boon is pretty okay, but they largely just compete with each other. And the problem for Poseidon in particular is that I feel like Hestia often outcompetes him. Because of the way Scorch works, Poseidon has an edge for weapons that specifically want to do burst damage. But Hestia is better for kind of consistent damage for reasons we'll talk about in a moment. So for that reason, I think Poseidon probably deserves B tier. Now, Hestia's Scorch is kind of similar to Poseidon's Waves in the sense that it's an on-hit effect, right? And you want to put on rapid attacking weapons. But the way it works is different, right? Instead of applying the damage immediately, instead there's a scorch number beneath the opponent's feet that kind of like a pool of damage, and then every second they will, that pool will reduce by 80 damage, and it will deal 80 damage to them, and that 80 damage can get multiplied by any global damage bonuses that you get. So the way it works is that if you're applying a ton of Scorch, then she's really more of a damage over time god in a lot of ways, because you're just going to have so much Scorch that you're always going to be doing 80 damage per second multiplied by whatever global damage bonuses you have. And if you don't have that many, if you're not attacking that quickly, or if you have one of her secondary boons, which we'll talk about in a moment, then she can be kind of more of an on-hit god. And kind of in return for the delayed nature of her damage, she deals more Scorch per attack than Poseidon deals damage with his waves. Right? Now, I think that with Hestia's Scorch being 80 damage per second, that she just outcompetes Poseidon most of the time, unless you're really just trying to burst enemy down, right? You just don't have any time at all for the Scorch to take down. And part of this is specifically due to one of her tier 2 boons, which is Pyrotechnique, which increases the rate at which Scorch deals damage. So instead of, for example, at common, I believe it's 50% bonus. So instead of losing 100 instead of losing 80, you do 120 damage per second. And so that's pretty big. and it can be palmed, or at higher rarity, it does even more than that, right? The other reason is that her and Demeter, who we'll talk about in a moment, have a particular duo boon, right? Freezer Burn, which is very powerful. Freezer Burn allows you to instantly proc all of your Scorch with a big damage bonus on top of it, a 200% damage bonus on top of it, right? And that's really, really strong, right? Because it essentially just turns her in a way into a better Poseidon, right? You can just do a bunch of attacks. You can get Scorch up to its cap of 999, immediately use Freeze, and Freezer Burn will then proc all 999 damage with um, a bonus effect, right? And then you can just do that again, right? There is a little bit of a problem here where Freeze takes some time to fall off, right? To wear off on the opponent, and during that time you can't apply Freeze again. But you do also need to dodge your opponent's attacks, right? You're not gonna just immediately tear the boss down in one fell swoop. And so Hestia just largely outcompetes Poseidon, in my opinion. It's not it's not like Poseidon is worthless compared to her. It's not, it is close, but I think Hestia generally does better for me with a few exceptions, and so I think Hestia deserves A tier and Poseidon deserves B tier. Now, Demeter is uh, primarily a defensive god, right? She has two curses, one of which is Freeze. Freeze does exactly what you think it does. You apply it onto an enemy, they stop, right? On bosses and some mini bosses, what it will instead do is it will slow them down pretty drastically, but it won't stop them. But even that's really good. And in particular, right, with Demeter, I often like taking her cast boon. The reason being that you can, if you're sort of surrounded by on all sides, or and you're a little bit like worried about things, you can just immediately plop down her cast boon. After a little bit, it will freeze everything around you, and everything around you will stop attacking you, and you can just try to DPS them down or get out of the situation, depending on what you need to do in the circumstance. Having that kind of omnidirectional defensive ability is, I think, really, really strong. She also has Gales. Gales usually deal piddly damage unless you buff them with Zeus's air quality. But what they do is that they reduce projectile speed, right? Projectiles who hit the whale, who hit the Gales will instead come slower. Will start moving slower, and it makes them easier to dodge most of the time. Sometimes it can just result in having a bunch of projectiles just sort of frozen in place, almost like landmines. But most of the time, it makes life easier for you, and you can get it on either as a secondary effect for your cast or on your dash. One thing in particular is that if you're using it as a secondary effect on your cast, it can help you apply origination, right? Or on your dash, right? But I'm gonna highlight the cast because it's a way for your cast to apply origination by itself, right? Your cast, or rather, origination needs you to apply two curses from two different Olympians. So if your cast is already applying a different curse, so for example, let's say that you have Hestia's Scorch cast, right? Then you have your cast applying Scorch. It will also apply the Gales, which are also a curse, and then you will have origination instantly off of one press of a button, which is really good. Demeter also has Snow Queen, which is a free hit every encounter. That's just very strong. It's a lot of extra health that you'll get over the course of the run, assuming that you're probably going to get hit most encounters. Um, and so for that reason, I'm going to put her in S tier. Specifically here, I think her cast is the best cast in the game. I'm going to just return to Hestia because I realized I should mention her cast a little bit more. Well, Hestia is primarily like a main damage carry, kind of in a sense. You can use her for support with her cast or with her infusion boon, right? Her cast in particular deals a surprising amount of damage just for a cast boon. I do prefer the defensive option from Demeter, but if you're trying to deal more damage or you just don't see Demeter, Hestia's cast is just a great cast to have to apply origination and do good area damage for you. Right, and then also she has some support boons. Flash Fire is a personal favorite of mine. It makes enemies who have Scorch on them explode. That's just extra damage while you're room clearing, but also it can be pretty satisfying where sometimes some rooms you just get a bunch of really small enemies, one of them dies and the rest just kind of fall like dominoes. That's pretty great. And then she has a good infusion boon. Her infusion boon gives you power on your attacks and specials, and uh, that's power, right, is a, like, once you have a percentage attack boon, which we haven't talked about too much, mostly because Demeter, who does give percentage attack boons, her percentages are really small. You don't want her on your attack most of the time, right? Um, But having extra power gets multiplied by those percentage boons, so it is more powerful than it looks, right? And it can be quite a bit of extra damage. The other thing I'm going to say about Demeter, just returning to her for a moment, is that she does have Weed Killer. Weed Killer is, I mean, primarily I think you value Demeter for her defensive chops, but Weed Killer gives you a huge percentage damage boost on your Omega attacks. Now, normally, Omega attacks are these big, hefty things, and you usually want percentage bonuses on them already. And stacking percentage bonuses on percentage bonuses, so for example, stacking um, a percentage, like for example, Aphrodite's attack with origination with another percentage bonus isn't that good. There's, in relative terms at least, there are diminishing returns there. Weed Killer is just huge. If I remember correctly, at common, it's either 50 or 75%, but it's palmable. And at higher rarities, it's just massive, right? It can just be 150% extra percentage damage on your Omega attacks. And if you're getting an Omega attacking weapon, or you're, for whatever reason, then Weed Killer is definitely worth going out of your way for it, because even with diminishing returns, that percentage boost is so big, it's just worth it. Now, Hephaestus is also a defensive god. Um, there are two parts to him, so we'll talk about his kind of big bong explosion effect first, right? So this is on his attacker special, and the way it works is that there's a timer, right? So you use it, you get this big explosion effect, and then it goes on cooldown, and then you can still attack or special while you're on cooldown, but you won't get that effect until it recharges. And the thing with this is that it's extremely inconsistent. Um, if you can get it down to a low charge time, so specifically its minimum is 2 seconds, if you can get it down to 2 seconds, then it's actually really quite good, but most of the time you can't, right? The special is so long that you just can't do it, but the attack, right? You need to get a high rarity on the attack, you need to get a bunch of palms on the attack, it's just not consistent. And unless you're able to push it down really low to 2.5 seconds, something like that, it's just not good enough. So his attacks aren't great, right? Just in general, they're not consistent at least. Where Hef really shines is with his tier 2 boons. He has a lot of like top tier defensive tier 2 boons. Some examples are Uncanny Fortitude, which converts your max magic into health. So if you're on let's say you're on a weapon that doesn't want a ton of max magic, then even just with the bonuses from your Arcana cards, this is often still 20 to 25 health, which is the center heart, which is pretty good. Um, and if you are running a weapon that does want to use its omegas and does want a lot of max max magic, then this can just be a lot of extra health over the course of a run, right? This could be like something like 40 health, 50 health, right? For one boon, that's pretty massive. Um, so that's pretty good. Another great boon of his is Security System, which gives you a bunch of temporary armor at the beginning of a room. And Security System, just having that extra defense, knowing that you're, for all intents and purposes, largely invulnerable at the beginning of a room, and you're able to just like go more offensively, knowing that any hits that you take aren't going to actually hurt you. That's pretty powerful, right? And then the temporary armor does disappear after a certain amount of time, but you can still be aggressive while you have it, right? Then what else does he have? He has Trusty Shield. Trusty Shield primes some magic to give you 10 armor, 10 armor every room. So that armor will disappear at the end of the room, but it lasts the entire room. And one way to think of this is that it's basically like Demeter Snow Queen. It's basically a uh, a free hit, right? The reason why that is because you can't take overflow damage through armor. So if you have 10 armor, you can take 20 damage, 30 damage, 40 damage. It will only break the armor. It won't actually hit your health, right? And so it's essentially a free hit every room, which is really strong. For that reason, I'm going to put Heffy in S tier as well. I think Zeus is pretty much universally useful offensively. Demeter is near universally useful defensively, essentially for any build that doesn't want a specific cast boon, at least. And then Heffy is also near universally useful, right? Uh, I'm never unhappy when I see him. I think most players probably would put Hephaestus above Demeter, maybe above Zeus. There was a time when he was definitely above Zeus, but he did get nerfed. I think I'm gonna put him here. I think even though I personally prefer Demeter, I think this is maybe more fair. Um, I'm going to just mention this mostly for fun and to highlight some interesting possibilities with him. He does have a pretty powerful duo boon with Zeus, right? Master Conductor takes Zeus's Chain Lightning, it gives it a damage bonus, and it lets it bounce on Mel, right? So that it can re-trigger off of her. So it becomes more effective in situations with less enemies, and that's a lot. That is actually really powerful. When I first read it, it didn't sound that strong, but uh, I recommend that you try to get it at least once, just to see. It feels really good. It is really strong. Aphrodite. So Aphrodite is the first real kind of percentage damage bonus god that we're going to talk about. Demeter also, her attack gives a percentage damage bonus, right? So, but her attacks are really weak. The percentage damage is really minimal. Aphrodite's percentage damage bonuses are colossal, right? She is the biggest ones in the game, right? For the most part. Uh, the exchange is that, unlike Demeter or some of the gods that we'll talk about later, she doesn't apply a curse with her attack, and also uh, she requires you to be close to the enemy. Now, close is an interesting term. One way you could think about close is that your axe almost always procs close. I think maybe there's like a tiny sliver where it doesn't, right? But if you can hit an opponent with the axe, you can think of them as being close, right? And that is a lot closer than you might think, right? So in that sense, she's quite good as a main carry, right? The lack of a curse does hold her back in a little bit. She need to take an extra boon to get her curse from. Now, luckily for her, her curse is pretty powerful. Weak gives damage reduction, and then her tier 2 support boons for weak, right, make it so that the first one gives even more damage reduction, which is quite nice. And then the second one makes it so that enemies with weak take more damage. This is again a global damage bonus. This then again affects something like Zeus's Blitz or Poseidon's Waves or Hestia's Scorch, right? It's just quite strong. Uh, the easiest way to apply weak is, I think, Glamour Gain. Right, Glamour Gain is her mana regen boon, but you largely don't use it for mana regen because it's not very good in that purpose. What Glamour Gain does is that it does make any enemy who's near you, who's close to you, so the same condition as her attack or special, it applies weak to them, and that weak stays on them indefinitely as long as you're close to them. So it's really powerful and it's really simple, right? You don't need to, no need for extra button presses, no need to do anything. It's a easy, strong way to apply origination and to apply one of the strongest curses in the game. So Aphrodite, I think, has a good mix of kind of ability to be a support offense god, a ability to be a support defensive god, and the ability to be your main kind of damage source, at least in terms of like having in her base attack or base special. And for that reason, I think I'm going to put her in A. One thing I do want to mention is that she does have a pretty strong synergy with Hestia. Um, Aphrodite has Secret Crush, right? That's also one of her calling cards in a way. Um, and Secret Crush gives extra power on your attack. So if you're playing a weapon which has a pretty weak attack, then you can take Aphrodite's for her percentage bonus, get Secret Crush to put more base power on the attack, which then gets multiplied by Aphrodite's large percentage bonus. And then Hestia's Infusion also provides base power, right? It provides 2 base power for every fire element boon that you have. And you can combine these two to get quite a lot of extra base power on attacks which are normally low base power but rapid hitting, and that's really strong. And then it gets multiplied by Hestia's percentage, or sorry, Aphrodite's percentage. So that's a pretty powerful combination. And one of the nice things about these two is that they have actually what is quite a nice duo boon. So their duo boon, Burning Desire, makes it so that if an enemy has both Scorch and Weak on them, then the Scorch damage continues to tick, but the Scorch doesn't actually reduce, right? And so basically what that means is that if you have Aphrodite's Glamour Gain in particular, and then you're able to apply even a little bit of Scorch onto them, they're going to continuously take that 80 damage per second, right? Multiplied by whatever global damage bonuses you have, right? For example, Aphrodite's Sweet Surrender, right? That's a source of global damage. That's another way to add on to that. And if you get Pyrotechnique, right, it gets even more, right? And so that's a powerful way to kind of get a ton of more damage on a build that's using Aphrodite as your main damage source. Um, it's less good on builds which are, using Hestia's attack. That's just because when you're using Hestia's attack, you're probably going to keep Scorch on your enemies fairly easily, right? That's your entire game plan is to keep Scorch on them. So having the Scorch, like, quote-unquote, last forever is less useful, right? Because you never run out of Scorch. You're always doing that damage over time. But when when you flip it and you make Hestia support god, then Scorch becomes harder to activate, and being able to apply just a little bit and then keep it on indefinitely becomes much, much more powerful. Okay, Apollo, like Aphrodite, also applies a percentage bonus. His percentage bonuses are also relatively large, right? They're not like Demeter's. And also, like Aphrodite, he doesn't apply a curse, right? But in exchange, right, he gets more area on his attacks, or rather on whichever attacker special is being augmented by his boon, right? Now, this isn't bad, but what I find is that largely I don't think I think that there is a god that we're going to talk about in just a little bit that is a bit of a spoiler, so I'm going to refrain from mentioning it by name, who does the whole area clear thing better, right? So Apollo doesn't really have that niche in my mind. What Apollo does have that I think is really good is extra dose. Extra dose gives you a percentage chance for your attack to happen again. And if most of your damage is coming from your attack, then that's almost a straight multiplier to your damage. And so that is pretty powerful, right? So one way you could think about the dichotomy between Aphrodite and Apollo in this sense is that uh, Aphrodite gives extra power, so she's really good on weapons which have low base power because she can augment that, she can buff that, and then that's a comparatively large increase. Apollo is good on is better on weapons which already have a lot of base power, right, and want that extra kind of percentage, that extra multiplier, right, on their already large base power. Now, another way where Aphrodite and Apollo is kind of similar is that Aphrodite's effect, right, her curse is kind of a good defensive effect in terms of giving damage reduction. Apollo's curse is a good defensive effect in terms of giving what is essentially dodge chance. Now, Apollo usually has a little bit of a rough time applying it. The way I would say to apply it consistently is Blinding Rush, right? Apollo's dash boon. Most dash boons are pretty bad at applying curses. Blinding Rush is the exception. It is really good. It applies curse in a pretty wide radius around where you're sprinting. And so it's a pretty good way to apply a curse. The last thing I'll say about him is that his mana regen boon is actually pretty good. Um, it gives you a large amount of mana back when you are standing in your cast as it expires. Now, sometimes it's just good kind of in general if you're staying within your cast. That is a fairly defensible position because it's, slowing all the enemies around you. Um, but it is a little awkward. It's a lot of mana that you get back, right? Specifically, the place where it's most useful is again Charon Axe, right? Charon Axe is the one weapon in the game that really wants to spam Omega casts, right? And it has a way of triggering them more and more often, right? And so with Apollo on Charon Axe, what you can do is you can just continuously spam your Omega casts in a way, right? And because you're using them so frequently, because you're often just staying within your cast, you're able to just get all that mana back instantly, and you can offset Charon's really massive mana costs without too much difficulty. Um, Now, that said, I don't use Apollo that much. I think that there is an argument for Apollo to be either to maybe be A if you use the weapons which want him frequently. So specifically, I'm thinking Charon. Maybe it's because I'm not that much of a Charon Axe user. I was a relatively late convert to Charon. Uh, I just don't use him that much. I think he's probably just better on the axe in general than he is on other weapons. That said, for me, I find he's a B tier god. I'm gonna put him here. I think that's fair from my experience. I'm I think maybe you should also form a little bit of your own opinion on Apollo, right? Don't say okay, well I saw Apollo's in B tier, I shouldn't use him, right? Just because he doesn't necessarily suit my playstyle doesn't mean he's bad. I would say neither of the gods in B tier are bad. There is only one god who is bad, and we're gonna get to them in a while. Speaking of which, this is where I will give my spoiler warning, right? The next two gods aren't gods which are unlocked at the beginning of the game, right? They're not gods that you have immediately. You have to do a certain thing to unlock them. It's not a very difficult thing. It's something the game is naturally going to guide you to. And in particular, it relates to the second route, right? So if you haven't gone to the second route, if you haven't done that yet, then I would recommend not, clicking off the rest of the video and maybe watching it later if you're still interested. But for those of you who maybe don't care about spoilers or who have gone to second route, we're going to go to uh, to those two gods next. So next god is Hera. Hera has a lot going on for her. She's very multifaceted. I think the first place to start with her is her mana regen boon. So specifically, so far we haven't talked too much about the mana regen boons to the gods because they're not that good. It's not that they're bad; they can have potential use cases. We highlighted Apollo's in particular, but they're all outclassed by Hera's, which is kind of universally good and universally useful. The way that Hera's works is that whenever you run out of magic, what it will do is it will prime some magic and then refill you back to full. And what this means is that magic, like the amount of magic you can use in an encounter, scales quadratically with the amount of max magic you have, right? Because this resets every room. And this is really powerful because it means that once you get to a certain amount of max magic, you have practically infinite magic. You no longer need to worry about it. And the big thing is that this works seamlessly in a way, right? Apollo's mana regen requires you to stay within your cast. Maybe you can't do that, right? Maybe you get chased out of your cast by an enemy. Hera doesn't have that problem, right? Somebody like Aphrodite, her mana regen boon requires you to be close to enemies, and it also gives you your mana back as a number over time. Now, getting mana back over time, those types of boons don't function while you're actually channeling your omegas for whatever reason, right? Hera's does, right? You could be channeling your omega and continue channeling your omega, and you never have to stop, right? Even if you run out of magic, will just immediately take you back to full, right? And so Hera's mana regen boon is the strongest, the easiest, the most applicable mana regen boon in the game, and any weapon that really wants to spam its omegas is probably going to go for her. There is one weakness to her. It doesn't show up on low or no fear, but on a higher fear, you're probably taking the vow, which primes your magic. Every time you take a boon above common rarity, right? So it will prime magic based on how rare the boon is. And with Hera in particular, what this means is, right? Because for someone like Apollo, maybe you just need to get enough mana that you can proc your omegas, right? You don't need to worry about your mana any more than that, right? Because you can just use Apollo to refill yourself, right? The same thing with everybody else. Your max mana just needs to be just enough that you can use your omegas consistently, right? Hera is different, right? Because Hera requires you to have a bunch of max magic in order to make sure that you don't prime yourself out, right? And so with Hera in particular, right, what you might end up finding with this vow is that, you start priming yourself maybe to take on some helpful effects. For example, Hephaestus's trusty shield, right? And then you start priming yourself because of this vow, and your max magic starts to dip low, and it's not a huge deal, but now you have to start taking max magic rewards, right, from rooms instead of gold or centaur hearts, and that's not ideal, right? It's a little bit of a cost to having to use Hera's that you do need to waste some rewards within quotes to take max magic when maybe you with a different magic region you'd be able to take something else, right? And that's why maybe you do end up using Hera on most magic hungry weapons, but when you're able to find somebody else who works effectively, so for example Apollo with the Caronax, then you immediately kind of, for lack of a better word, you jump ship, right? That said, Hera is absolutely the queen, right? And specifically, the torches, they don't really function without her. They're constantly channeling by their nature. They're incredibly mana hungry, and they want Born Gain, right? They want Hera's mana regen boon really badly, right? Now, one of the things that's kind of related to that is really great about Hera is that she's got Fine Line, which is an extra effect that she applies to your Omega. So whenever you use an Omega move, you will also create this damaging kind of rift under you as an extra effect. And this extra effect, of course, like all other extra effects, gets buffed by global damage bonuses. And so this is really powerful on weapons which can use their Omegas really frequently. And here in particular, I'm thinking about Valenoi's aspect of the torches, right? You're constantly, Omega, you constantly get this extra effect, right? It's just a great way to add more damage. And the cost here is that it increases the mana cost of your Omegas. Now, Hera's already got the best mana regen boon in the game, right? She's got functionally infinite mana if you can get enough max magic, right? So that's not a huge deal to her. The other thing is that there are there are boons which can make this a positive for you, right? One of them I'm not going to talk about because it is kind of a spoiler warning even relative to Hera, right? But an example, a much weaker example of that is Aphrodite's heartthrobs. We didn't talk about them too much because they're not very good, but the way that they work, right, is that, use a certain amount of mana, you spawn a heartthrob, which will do a certain amount of damage, right? So you can turn using mana into a positive for yourself. And in that sense, that is really, really powerful. The other things that Hera has going for her, one of them is Hitch, right? Hera has this big percentage damage effect, kind of like how Aphrodite and Apollo do. And unlike Demeter's, hers is actually rather large, right? And her attacks also apply Hitch, so that means that she doesn't need an extra boon in order to apply Curse, which is nice. But also, Hitch is really strong, right? The way Hitch works is that whenever you deal damage to an enemy with Hitch, every other enemy with Hitch takes damage equal to 15% of the damage you dealt. This is also a multiplier, right? It's 15% of the damage you dealt, so that means it's 15% of your base damage, 15% of any percentage damage bonuses that you have, 15% of any global damage bonuses you have. It's a lot, right? And it applies to everything. So it's really strong. And the more enemies there are, right, the more times you're going to have this Hitch effect proccing, right? The better it gets, right? So it's really, really good, especially when you start increasing the enemy density, like you increase the amount of enemies spawning with the Vows, particularly the Vow of Hordes. The other thing that it's really good at is that there are certain effects in the game which start to apply blue hearts to enemies, right? So specifically here, I'm thinking about the Vow of Wards, which is one of the other fear in the game that you can take, which will provide one or two of these blue hearts. But there are also sometimes these pillars which can do that, or certain enemies, certain armored enemies with the Vow of Fangs can do that as well. And these blue hearts, right? What they do is that they will, when you hit an enemy with them, instead of the enemy taking damage, they will instead lose a blue heart, right? And for weapons which attack slowly, right? This is often difficult, right? Fast attacking weapons often don't struggle with this because they attack so fast that they just remove the blue hearts instantaneously, but also they're taking on hit effects, which also contribute to removing these blue hearts. But slow attacking weapons want percentage damage bonuses, and their attacks so slow that losing a hit is a big deal to them. Hera can help with that, right? Because her hitch, or the damage from her hitch, can help take off these hearts, right? And can help clear rooms after all those hearts are gone. And so that's a really powerful thing that can happen. Now, hitch is a little bit less important on low fear, specifically just because you probably don't have extra enemies, and also because normal enemies are not that dangerous on low fear. They're not easy to beat, right? But the real hurdles are usually the bosses, right? It's only when you start applying tons and tons of extra fear that you start to realize that the enemy encounters become much more dangerous, just because there's so many more of them and they'll have more health and they'll deal more damage. They can become quite a nightmare, honestly. The last thing with Hera is that she has some support capacity, right? So specifically, the two boons I'm thinking of here are, the first is Bridal Glow. Bridal Glow will pick a random boon, upgrade it to heroic, so push it to the max rarity, and then give it a couple of palms. And if you can get Bridal Glow early, right, when you have one or two boons, you can essentially, I mean, either choose the boon, right, if you have one boon, or maybe just gamble a little if you have two boons. And if you can get it to hit one of your core boons, that's really effective, right? So for example, right, if you can get it to hit Zeus's thing, then it buffs Zeus's base attack, which then gets multiplied by your global damage bonuses, and you can get a ton of damage, right? Zeus can go from maybe 100 base damage to 200 and something base damage that again gets multiplied by 1.8 because of origination of the Furies. That is really, really strong. Or you could do that for Poseidon, or even on the gods which don't benefit from global damage bonuses, like Apollo or Aphrodite, right? Just taking, your common or rare core boon and pushing it all the way to heroic and giving a couple palms is a big power spike. So that's something that you can do. It's not worth going for late in the run, right? Just because at that point you can no longer it could hit anything. It could hit that one random boon that you took because you opened you bought a boon in a shop hoping to get something and didn't find anything, and it could just end up completely useless. But early into the run, it's often worth it. It's often really worth it. The other thing is that she has extended family, which buffs your Olympian damage. Olympian damage is just any extra effects that you get from Olympian gods, right? So Zeus's Blitz, or Poseidon's Waves, or Hestia's Scorch, and so on, right? And it buffs it based on the number of gods you have, and this is often something like 20 to 25%. which is just a nice extra bonus, right? It's almost kind of like having um, a really high ranking Sweet Surrender from Aphrodite, right? Except you don't need weak, and it's often a little bit bigger, right? The only thing is it doesn't apply to your actual weapon strikes. It doesn't apply to your like basic attack strike or basic special strike. So it's not quite a global damage bonus, but it is close, right? Hera, I'm going to put an S tier. Maybe I'm being a little overzealous. 4 gods in S tier. Maybe Hera is not universally useful in the way these gods are. I think you could make the argument Demeter also drops, but it's my tier list. I'm going to put her in S tier. You can make the argument for A. You can definitely make the argument for A, I think. Um, and the final god, second spoiler warning because he comes really, really late, even really late compared to Hera. Uh, so, again, click off the video if you want to right now and come back later, question mark. The final god is Ares. Now, Ares kind of has 3 things going for him. The first is wounds, and it's kind of, and the double damage effects. I'm going to talk about them together because they're kind of linked, kind of not. So specifically, wounds is Ares' curse. The way wounds works is that when you apply the curse, you get a bunch of extra power on that strike, and then wounds takes a while to fall off, during which time you can't apply it again, and then once it falls off, you can apply it again and get a bunch of extra power on that strike. Now, I hear some things which I don't think are strictly speaking true. People kind of argue, oh, is it better on slow weapons or fast weapons? The reality is it's equally beneficial on any weapon, right? Because the way that wounds works is that it's a timed effect, right? It's timed in the same way that Hephaestus is a timed effect or Zeus is a timed effect, right? Uh, it maybe it's slightly better when you use the percentage god, so maybe it's arguably slightly better on the slow weapons, but it's relatively minor, right? You're already getting the bonus from your global damage. You're already getting the bonus from. Actually, no, that's sorry. Disregard everything I just said, right? Because you need to take Ares' own core boon for that, right? So it is exactly the same across every weapon, right? It's the same DPS increase across every weapon as long as you are applying it consistently, because it is every so however long it takes for wounds to drop off, that amount of time, right? Every time that happens, you get a big as an overstatement, you get a medium burst of damage, right? So it is equivalent across all weapons. It's also not a lot, right? Now, the one thing that Ares has over Hephaestus is that, okay, they both have this kind of timed effect, right? Presumably because they are siblings, right? They both inherit certain properties from Zeus. Um, but anyways, that's neither here nor there. They both get this kind of timed effect. But the nice thing about Ares is that Ares gets some percentage bonus, right? He gets a baseline percentage bonus, which means that his that attack is not completely useless while you're waiting for wounds to drop off. The other thing is that you apply wounds to each enemy individually, right? So you don't have to worry in the sense of like, oh well, um, you know, how kind of like with Hephaestus, right? It's just a timed effect, right? You use it and then you have to wait a certain amount of time, right? So maybe you have to worry about using it when you can hit the most enemies with it. With Ares, right, every enemy, right, has their own individual timer, right? And so Ares has that kind of benefit as well. The the problem with Ares is that it's just not very good. Now the nice thing is that there is a boon which relies upon wounds, which is itself pretty good, which is Grievous Blow, right? Grievous Blow gives you a percentage chance whenever an enemy with wounds is dealt damage to double that damage, and that's strong, right? Because that's a multiplier. Again, unlike most percentage increases in the game, this applies to everything, right? It applies to the base damage of the weapon, it applies to any percentage bonuses you get, it applies to any global damage bonuses you get. And so it's a lot stronger than it looks, right? Because it applies to, it gets multiplied by so many different effects, right? And it is quite powerful. Now, the percentage is low, but even at a low percentage, it's good, right? And really, it is Ares' claim to fame. It's the reason why you go for Ares. Uh, Kind of as a spoiler, Ares is not, in my eyes, a very good god, but that's not because of Grievous Blow. Grievous Blow is still really strong, it's just the rest of Ares which doesn't provide you with that much. The one thing with Grievous Blow is, again, you need to take an Ares attack or special, right? And maybe that's not always what you want to do, right? in particular, right, you need to take his attacker special. So if you're running a weapon, right, maybe you want Zeus on your special and you want Aphrodite on your attack, and already you kind of have locked yourself out of this, right? So you have to pick between one of them, and Ares doesn't really replace either, right? So there is a little bit of a tension there, right? But Grievous Blow is still really good in itself. Ares also has Mutual Destruction, which gives you a chance to double damage when depending on how low of health you are. The scaling with your lost health isn't that good, but it's not bad, and doubling damage is again really powerful, and especially on hard runs, you're going to be on low health, right? So it is a pretty powerful build. Not as consistent as Grievous Blow, is what I would say. Now, uh, he does have two other kind of effects that aren't very good. One of these is his Blade Drop effects. Um, so basically, right, his cast or his dash, right, or he has a boon which gives you this effect on Omega attacks as well, right? What they will do is that it will have a sword over the enemy's head. It will take some time, and then the sword will fall and deal some damage to them. Uh, this effect sucks. I don't know. It just doesn't do enough damage. It's just really slow, and it doesn't do enough damage. Um, It does have like two duo boons which can make it better. One with Hephaestus and one with Apollos. The Hephaestus is make them drop faster and gives them more power, like more damage, and then Apollos doubles them. And these are both really crazy buffs, and I've gotten both of them at the same time in the same run, and the effect still sucks. I mean, it doesn't suck. It just becomes okay. It just becomes fine. It just becomes like mid, right? And so it's kind of crazy to think about that, you can have two really strong duos, you can get them both together, and the effect becomes mid, right? So just kind of at a baseline, it's just not good, right? It's just not good. You don't want to get it. I mean, you can kind of go for this kind of duo setup for a fun run, right? But from a like, beat the game, like beat higher difficulties of the game, it's just not worth it, right? The one which applies on your omegas is particularly good just because, kind of like how we were discussing with Hera, having these extra effects on your megas are good, especially because this one makes you cost more magic, right? And you can turn this magic usage into a benefit. Now, this is the point where, if you've unlocked Ares, you've discovered the person who I was alluding to, right? Who gives the benefit for using magic. So we're gonna just talk about her now. Athena has a particular boon, right? Righteous Pike, which when you use a certain amount of magic, summons these three Athena, like the Athena's golden spears. It summons three of them to attack enemies, right? And so Ares' bonus to Omegas, right? The fact that it costs more magic is actually useful, so that boon is actually potentially quite decent, right? It's just not good in general, right? It's extremely niche. The last effect that Ares has is his blood drops, right? So he has a boon which makes it so that whenever he takes damage, whenever he kills an enemy, he gets blood drops, and then another one which makes it so whenever an enemy with wounds takes damage, he has a percentage chance to get blood drops. Um, the one which happens on killing an enemy is also a percentage chance. It's just a much higher percentage chance, by the way. And blood drops are also not very good. They give you, so the way that they work is that they are these things that fly off of you or the enemies and land on the ground, and you have to go and collect them. When you collect them, they give you 1% attack speed and 1% move speed, and they're just not worth like trying to collect. First of all, they're hard to see sometimes because they can just sort of, they're small enough they sort of just blend in. But even if you can see them, they're just not worth kind of trying to collect, and frequently you just sort of end up with like 6% extra attack or move speed, that too at the end of the encounter, and it's just not that great. His mana regen boon also gives that, but his mana regen boon is not very good, and the blood drops aren't worth it. Um, his legendary does buff them, right? I said I was going to talk about legendaries, and I guess I will talk about this one just because it does buff them. Uh, but getting legendaries is hard, right? Maybe you should do it for fun. You should do it to have a fun run. But getting the legendaries hard. It makes them twice as effective. It gives you kind of it makes them fly to you automatically, which is honestly the bigger bonus, right? And even then, they're just not that good, right? The big problem is that getting legendaries is hard, right? Getting a legendary boon is just really tricky because you need to see the same god a ton of times. You need to get all the requirements. right? In Ares' case, maybe you also want to get Grievous Blow because it's his only good boon, basically, in a way. Um, and it's just tricky to get the same god repeatedly. It is possible, particularly on the surface, right? You can. I already have a video on that. Hopefully, that came out. Maybe I don't. I'm not sure which order these videos will be releasing in, but I will. If I don't have that video, I will be releasing it soon. But the point is, you can manipulate the surface to give you a better chance at legendaries by showing the same god again and again. But that is costly. That's resource intensive on your rerolls, and even if you manage to get him to show up bunch of times, even if you manage to get all the prerequisites, the chance of getting a legendary is not particularly high, right? So he might just not give it to you. In which case you've done a lot of work for nothing, and you've taken a lot of bad boons because Ares has a lot of bad boons for nothing. Uh, and so that's just not worth it. If you're wondering why duo boons are different, right? It's for a lot of reasons. First of all, they tend to have less requirements, but also they're between two gods. So once you've fulfilled the requirements, you have two chances to see them, right? Depending, because you could get either god, which is nice. And also because they're between two gods, oftentimes they just have better requirements. Their requirements are often core boons. Specifically, maybe I'm just going to briefly discuss one that I sort of chose to omit for time, and now am ignoring that, I guess. Zeus and Demeter, right? For example, have a duo boon that isn't very good in Hailstorm. I mean, it's fine, but it's not great, right? It's not amazing. But the thing is that Hailstorm is really easy to get, right? You need a Zeus core and a Demeter core, and you already probably want either Zeus's attack or special, and you already probably want Demeter's cast. And so suddenly you get both of those two things. You need specifically a Demeter core that applies freeze, right? Anyways, that's not the point, right? The point is that it's really easy to get both the requirements, and then suddenly, Zeus and Demeter are both gods that you maybe don't hate seeing again. Uh, and even if you do hate seeing them, maybe you get Demeter from a one of those bags, right? One of those unknown boon bags from Charon or something, and you can just find it, right? And it's 60 base damage per second, right? That's just good. That's just a good boon which has very easy prerequisites. Uh, Ares' legendary, on the other hand, has very hard prerequisites. So it's just kind of not worth it. It really just doesn't move the needle. And so Ares himself has only one good boon, maybe 1.5 good boons if you count mutual destruction. Both, his good boon and Grievous Blow requires you to take his attacker special, which aren't great boons and which are very competitive slots. And so I just don't find Ares good. And Ares is going to be our only C tier god. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about Aphrodite and Artemis and Hermes just because they're different. And so I think that wraps us up. Thank you for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. I'm getting better about remembering that. And thank you and goodbye.